Hello and welcome to this episode of Mystical Teachings as we explore the mysteries and the cosmic understandings of our universe. I'm your host, Black Nervolf. In this episode, we will explore the conceptions and concepts of magic and its origins and what it means to us and the universe and the world around us. Now, if we think as magic as the essence of the universe, the very air we breathe and the energy that surrounds us and binds us to our existence, then we can say that magic is both energy, vibration, and frequency. Now, magic is a widely used term that covers spiritual forces, otherworldly intervention, and other cosmic events that can't be explained by science or religion. Magic is normally of either arcane or divine origin. Now, in this sense, there is two categories that we will explore in this analogy. Arcane magic is that of where the individual can conjure forces within themselves and their surrounding environment to then manipulate said energies to their own personal use and their journey in their own path so that they can do their said tasks and go on their path using the energies and magic and, for want of a better term, spells. The divine origin is where magic can be described as the work of the divinity, the gods, and that of higher spiritual beings than ourselves. The general acts of magic are typically known as spells, incantations, and most traversely can be spoken either by doing movement, written, and most can describe in ritualistic practices or ceremonies or prayer. Now, magic is the all-inclusive force that can make impossible things possible. There is no one universal reason or source of magic. The concept of magic has different meanings in various cultures and religions. Magic is a powerful underlying energy within the universe. It is an all-purpose force that in most scriptures is described as the work of God. Now, if we concentrate on the characteristics and classifications of magic as within these two classifications, i.e. divine and arcane, we can then sum up to this question asking about divine magic, or magic that involves a deity as a patron who provides the magical energy behind the casting or the ritualistic effect. In answering that question, I realized that most ancient forms of magic were, at least according to most classifications and characterizations, I could think of as divine. For those not in the know, divine magic involves a deity or a spiritual entity or other supernatural creature, whereas arcane magic involves no deities, spirits, or other supernatural deities, creatures, or other supernatural entities of that origin. Most arcane practitioners or spellcasters within the ancient world were more like tricksters or profiteers who simply hid their tricks from common knowledge. Even in the ancient Greco-Roman world, magic was differentiated from religion only by social constructs, not a source of power. Even individuals in legend who we would think of as arcane spellcasters often have divine inheritance, or divine themselves. Merlin, for example, perhaps the first naive choice for an example of an arcane practitioner, but more or less. He may have had divine or demonic inheritance, which was then fixed by divine magic. So to make him a mortal with supernatural powers, such as supernatural powers especially when fixed by obviously divine intervention, could easily be considered divine, even if Merlin's demonic inheritance is discounted. I cannot confidently place him as an arcane caster because we simply do not know what divine magic is, or what drives his magic. This is compounded by the observation that his character may have been inspired by druids, making him a druid, which is a divine spellcaster, according to a lot of characterizations, however. Gandalf, another naive choice for an example of an arcane spellcaster, was actually a demi-angel. Due to his divinity, he's able to cast spells. That's another example of a person who we could consider an arcane caster, but is actually divine. Most other legendary, but still mortal figures with magic are priests to a god, a druid, or have blood from mythical creatures, which are considered to have the divine magical hookups. Obviously, we cannot use these individuals as the source of arcane magic. The source of arcane magic must be elsewhere. Even in the earliest ages, which in turn influenced other works of fantasy, there was most definitely an arcane magician of some sort. Gygax wrote several appendices, which one pertinent one called Appendix N, which cites sources of many books as his basis from formulating his influential thesis on the idea of arcane magic. This is a little more that I got from ideas over there, and does not explain how his two systems worked, or where his ideas actually originated from. The move to have pure arcane casters certainly happened at some point in history, because we have wizards, like those in the Harry Potter universe, who don't sacrifice rams to a deity for their powers. This brings me to the question with an auxiliary question. Where did the idea of arcane magic in a sense of actual tangible magical energy that you can manifest within yourself without any divine origins, where did it come from, or what you can use it without the need of devotion or blood relation to a higher power come from? Is arcane magic inspired from a class or a tricky god-manipulating science people that we got arcane magic from, or the idea, actually conception, where did it originate from? Because again, we have a case of historical connotations throughout history in different literature and different statements within facts. Although, to be clear, an ideal answer will have the following quotes from references to scholars or authors about the origin of arcane magic, as opposed to divine magic. Remember, arcane magic involves no spirits or deities or any influence from a higher power. Mythological sources of validity, arcane mages, the more ancient the better. Remember that arcane magic means that this magic functions and exists independent of divinity. Verification would involve someone using their magic in spite of deities or omnipotent speakers specifically stating the magic does not come from any divine sources. Cultural traditions of magic use without the aid of spirits or other mythological or divine creatures. Now, depending on how strictly you want to interpret divinity, a number of societies from antiquity believed in forms of magic that were not strictly divine in nature. In particular, both the classical Greek and Norse cultures had forms of magic that derived their power not from gods, but from secret knowledge of the workings of the world. The very definition of arcane. These practices were still very spiritual in nature. involving spirit realms and gods as actors in the practice of magic. But that's almost unavoidable. To those ancient societies, there was no real difference between the divine, spiritual, and the scientific. In order to have something which approaches the mechanical magic we see in fantasy fiction today, I think you need to have a mechanical, secular understanding of science, which is a fairly new concept. Unfortunately, by the time that kind of awareness developed, magic had become a thing of Satan in Western culture. So I suspect, though I have no proof, that you would find a huge time gap where arcane magic disappeared from popular awareness until very recently, well within the last century, when it became making a comeback. However, as mentioned, that the concept of magic is merely channeling the power of spirits and gods, be it arcane or divine, within the characteristics of our analogy today, is largely a misinterpretation of how ancient cultures throughout magic. It was often very similar to religion, in the sense that it had the same kinds of rites and writings and scriptures, which is probably why it became so easy to demonize later on. But if you really look at how ancient cultures treated it, it becomes clear that at least some of them considered magic to just be a part of the natural order of the world. To the ancient Greeks, there was a clear distinction between religion, the worship of the gods, and magic, attempting to gain the powers of the gods. In many cases, the two were tied closely together. The popular practice of divination, for example, was seen as the gods speaking through an oracle, but it's clear from the language, if nothing else, that the Greek idea of magic matches very closely what we call magic in modern English today, separate and distinct from religious worship. Since the gods, the Greek gods, an integral part of nature, it's difficult to separate them completely from magic or any other aspect of Greek mythology. However, there is evidence to suggest in pre-classical Greek writings of magical practitioners that studied the forces of the world around them, what they could have called sympathies, in order to control them. The gods were still usually present in these stories, but not as suppliers of magic, but suppliers of knowledge of magic. For example, in the Odyssey, Odysseus runs into the witch Circe. Circe herself is, of course, a god, actually a titan, but Odysseus is fully mortal. To help him out, the god Hermes shows Odysseus the means to use magic to defend himself from Circe. This magic is a mundane, as you can get a magic wand and a magic herb. Hermes, here, is acting as just a messenger. The gods possess all of the arcane knowledge needed to use the magic, but they have no exclusive power over it. In theory, Odysseus could have written down the knowledge in a tome and given it to anyone else, and they could have gained the same control over magic as he did. To expand on this analogy even further, we could quote Clarke's law. There are a few famous magicians in classical times that we could probably consider scientists or mathematicians today. Pythagoras, for example, was famous for performing a variety of magical abilities, as is the lesser-known Empedocles. Some of these acts are clearly fantastical, talking rivers, and etc., etc., etc. But others, healing the sick or raising the dead, could well be indicative of more advanced knowledge of health and medicine than those around him. This fascination with magic in Greece lasted well into the Hellenistic period. There are written records of magic, potions, and spells right up through the Roman invasion, and even afterwards. There are remnants of this Greek concept of magic even in the Bible. Simon Magus is described as practicing evil sorcery of the sort that the Greeks would have recognized. By that time, the Judeo-Christian idea of witchcraft being a tool of the devil was starting to take over. So this is probably the last vestiges of secular magic you're likely to find. Now, within Norse mythology, there is a form of magic known as Sedir, which was not powered by the gods, but by the forces of the spiritual world. In fact, in the Norse minds, it was the other way around. The power of the gods, like Odin and Frigga, came from their use of magic, the same kind of magic that mortals used. Of course, Odin was far more powerful than any human, but the women, it was mostly women magic used, was considered a primarily feminine pursuit, would gather together in large groups, often entire villages, to provide their spiritual essence to the magical power. As with the Greeks, Sedir magic was closely associated with religion, though there were separate things. The mediums that practiced Sedir used it to send their spirit throughout the 9 realms of the Norse mythology. They used their magic for more mundane uses. Both God predicted weather, promoting crop growth, and evil, cursing enemies and villagers and whatnot. The women practitioners were also often religious leaders, and they would sometimes use their magic to invoke the gods, similar to the concept of summoning or binding a demonic entity. But that was mostly because their use of magic gave them special insight into the workings of the gods and the spiritual world around them. So now, as we understand a more concrete realization of what arcane magic and what divine magic is, we can now delve into it a little deeper. Arcane magic, in a sense, is a state where the user becomes one with the essence of magic, achieving a state of union between the body, as in the physical body, so that the practitioner becomes, in a sense, of unison between the body and the mind and the spirit, and the magic that flows throughout the universe. It is activated via the user, the practitioner, achieving a state of tranquility known as clear and serene, which is achieved through an advanced breathing technique where the user's mind must be clear, psychologically speaking. They have to free themselves from all negativity in their mind and heart, and must maintain a focus on the set task at hand, and nothing else. While doing so, the practitioner's magical aura flares up to its highest output as the magical energy begins to permeate from their body, achieving perfect synchronicity with the world, enabling the practitioner to tap into any form of magical energy, such as the magical auras, magical power, and even the eternity within the universe, granting them absolute dominance over the concept of their own supernatural energy within themselves and the environment around them. When under the effects of this state of tranquility in this arcane, supreme, higher state of consciousness that we're going to call it, the practitioner becomes a maelstrom of luminous magical energy that pours from a calm center in which they do not appear to be present either physically or as an individual personality. having completely merged with the essence of magic, becoming a being of glowing light. Indeed, when they are within this state of mind, this arcane energy is signified by the practitioner's eyes becoming surrounded by a flaming glow, or their aura is emanating outward and that it can resonate with the energy around them. The practitioner who possesses this state of mind is said to be the sworn enemy, or that of the conscious mind of artificial magic, or that of the mundane reality which can be perceived as technological advances, or the magic of that can be described as other sources without retaining any knowledge of the universe or the concept of reality, and trying to go beyond and transcend the mundane reality. Again, something which the human mind of the average person cannot normally carry, or of course carrying such a power is somewhat reckless of the changing of the world. It is said that inheriting the magic, or becoming one with the universe, is similar to one's options being closed off with no alternative paths available. Everything becomes one, and then you can realize the true potential of yourself in a being, not just a physical, tangible human being, but one that is an essence of the universe. When the practitioner reaches a much higher level of consciousness, i.e. when the user or practitioner becomes more aware of themselves in the spiritual sense and the magic in the arcane sense, in this state all of their physical attributes are bolstered enormously, and the practitioner has then access to upgrades or even additions to their normal abilities that, let's just say, like superhuman strength, or attributes that they wouldn't normally be able to do on their normal day lives. The magical energy that then surrounds them can then be manipulated and manifested at will, including that of the people around them and the atomic structure of said people and the environment, turning it into an extension of their body to increase the reaches of their tasks or their will. Due to the practitioner's gathering and absorption of that magical energy throughout the atmosphere, the energetic origin will instinctively react when the practitioner is about to act on his will, warning them of a potential or immediate danger by the manifestation of a auric field that can react with the practitioner's workings. So now that we've delved a little deeper into the possibilities of arcane magic, so we're going to discuss a little bit about the history within literature and methodologies within society of how old the concept actually is. So, in speaking, we could say that the arcane magic is of ancient origin, that it goes beyond 5,000 to 6,000, way beyond, like, say, for example, Babylonian, the Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Egyptians, and ancient civilizations have practiced this arcane art for decades and millennia, all the way to the beginning of time, or that time being in essence of where the origin of creation existed, being that of the oldest magics ever recorded, but most historical details about it are unknown. There are all sorts of rumours abound, such as it being related to the oneness of the universe, the one magic, or that it was the strongest magic, or that of, like, it's closely related to that of that's why arcane magic and divine magic are the only two specific characteristics or characterizations that are personified so that we can actually identify them as individual magics. A magic which for outstripped any other, even the crowd daring known as the artificial magic, which can say magic that is not of arcane origin or divine origin. We'll discuss that later. Another rumor is that arcane magic was originally two separate magics. An absorbency type magic, which enables the practitioner to stockpile all sorts of powers, and transference type magic, which can then give the practitioner power to others. Supposedly in ancient times, the practitioner of those two magics were exposed to a target amount of eternal source magic. Instead of simply being absorbed, contaminated the practitioner's magic origin and affected the two magics. Again, this is hypothesis and it's just a rumor. There is no concrete evidence to say that this is actually real or literature to back it up. So now that we understand the concept of arcane magic and divine magic, arcane magic being the fact that you can, the individual being, the practitioner, the spellcaster, can materialize the energy of the universe, or the weave, as it were, the fabric of reality. Whereas divine magic is a direct conduit or contact with divinity, the actual concept of the source, where the origin of creation. So source energy or divine energy are one and the same. So realizing this, and within literature, scientific methodology and religious scripts, we can now understand or have a good realization of the origin of magic itself and where the ideals come through, both religious, scientific and literature. We'll now explore where pseudoscience comes in. Pseudoscience being that, or pseudo being made up, and science obviously the measure or examination or observation of study that can be realized and tangible and put forward as fact. So the idea of pseudoscience being that most scientific circles refuse to believe the concept of magic versus consciousness. So they have identified it as a pseudo-scientific study rather than having it as a tangible, classical or mainstream scientific methodology. So now we're going to talk about the pseudo-scientific study. We're going to delve into this into our next episode, where we're going to explore the science of magic. Now, it's weird to say science and magic in the same sentence, because magic is and has been, by most scientific studies and circles, isolated by the terminology of science, because magic is not science. It cannot be science because it doesn't exist. There's no such thing. But as we come through into a more correlation of both religion and science, we're getting more into the actual fact that magic, consciousness and the universal construct are one and the same. And by saying that, we can actually put evidence and study into actual fact, so that we can actually see magic actually working on a conscious level. I do hope that you've enjoyed this episode and I haven't tired you or put you to sleep. If I have, then my apologies. But again, if you'd like this video, press the like button, and if you didn't, you know what to do. And if you want to hear more, subscribe, and I hope to see you again in our next episode of mystical teachings. I'm your host, Black Nova Wolf.